Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Don Gates, an alcoholic. I probably was forewarned, but if so, forgot that this meeting is now starting at 8 o'clock instead of 8:30. And I apparently put the secretary's faith to the test. The Bible speaks of them, ye of little faith. But in a way, it's more difficult for the speaker who arrives late than it is the secretary, because if you are, as at least many of us are, caught up in the events of daily life, it takes you a certain length of time before you can shift down into a spiritual mode. And particularly if you tend to be the Don Rickles type like I am, who finds something to mock or to make sport about in the people who precede you taking birthday cakes or giving short pitches and in their inarticulate way trying to explain something. And when you come in cold and there's no launching platform, it's very difficult. And I had quite a busy day today, and in fact, I've been rather busy for a period of time with a lot of various, I tend to do bizarre things so far as I am capable of finding them, because my higher power always has a little twist on the ball, it seems like, that he throws to me. And I have discovered, as I've probably mentioned many times in other monologues, that I have seen no evidence to date that life is to be taken seriously. And last weekend, I guess it was, my wife and I were asked to speak in North Dakota. Now, we have a fairly busy schedule, and we ordinarily would not take an out-of-town pitch at that time. We might very well have turned down Florida, but the very idea of speaking in a conference in North Dakota in January, I mean, that has to be God's will. So we went up there, and it was in Jamestown, North Dakota. It's a very small little town between Fargo and Bismarck, two also very small little towns. The only tourist attraction apparently they have, well, that's not quite true. There's two tourist attractions, but one is a large buffalo that someone carved. And the other one is the state mental institution in which Clancy was never confined. But those are the two things that they're proud of. And my wife and I decided to go out for a run, and the temperature was about 10 degrees or outside. They said it was a very mild winter, but it was about 10 degrees, and we ran over to this buffalo. And it is an impressive thing. There's no question. I mean, it's 29 feet tall. It's 36 feet long or something like that, weighs 40 tons. And I ran underneath it and looked up and discovered that it was male. And it was extremely impressive. As a farm boy, I have been taught to take off my hat in the presence of anything with greater testimonials than my own. And as you can tell, I'm fumbling for a starting point because I still haven't shifted over into anything spiritual. During the daytime in my profession, we try to keep church and state entirely separate. But AA does creep into what I do. As some of you probably know, I try as I will to be deadly serious in what I do. I find it so hard because AA has taught me that the worst thing you can do to another human being is to spare them the consequences of his own behavior. And I have always had a natural gift at rising above the suffering of others. And so I will sometimes find myself putting things into my decisions that really shouldn't be there, at least when they're going to be published. For example, I used to brag about the fact that I was always a great father, that every Sunday I used to take my children out for a drunk drive. The other day I filed a decision in which I began with just an offhand statement. Didn't strike me as odd, but an offhand statement about how the plaintiff in his complaint had alleged that on one Sunday while out for a drunk drive he did, they don't talk like that down there. I got a call from a newspaper that wanted to publish it together with an account of my own career, and I explained the anonymity principle. But I guess I visualize the things that it's strange when I was young and drinking and knew everything, no one asked me to speak or would listen to anything I had to say. And now that I battle hand to hand with Alzheimer's and am increasingly convinced that I know little or nothing about life, I'm called upon to speak and extol opinions about various things, and I always visualize that some of the decisions I write, they're in every law library in the country, that some attorney is going to be looking through it, and he'll come across these little AA cliches I throw in from time to time. In the law, we speak a somewhat archaic language. We will say a complaint sounds in tort, or it sounds in contract, or it sounds in equity. I don't know why that expression is used. Someone used it several centuries ago, and they still use it. But they say it sounds in this or that field of law. And I wrote a decision many years ago. I said the appellate's complaint sounds in resentment and self-pity, but states no cause of action known to the law. I visualize some attorney making some attorney's day somewhere when he hey! Filed one the other day that said, in law as in life, half measures avail us nothing. And my colleagues, when they signed it, said, where do you get those phrases? They're just so epigrammatical. And I said, they just come to me. I don't know. I guess maybe I was thinking of that partly because I had to stay at the office and finish something, and then I was reminded when they were talking about people with court cards, that has become a somewhat accepted practice here in Los Angeles and Orange County areas. But it's still not entirely settled elsewhere, and in fact, of course, it isn't entirely settled here, but in the particular line of the judiciary I'm in, none of you will ever have occasion to see me, so you shouldn't be involved in that. At my level, you already have to have been convicted of a felony and put away before you're entitled to complain. It won't be any good, but feel free to take but we never see the litigants. The cases have previously been tried. In fact, I would never have wanted to be a trial judge because then you have to try people, whereas I get to try judges. But this idea of having court cards signed, you know, this is a relatively recent innovation here. It was tried quite a number of years ago, I guess. Well, recent depends on how old you are, but maybe 20 years ago it was first tried, I think, down in the San Pedro area. Some judge had discovered that his best customers weren't showing up on Monday morning. And he, missing them, checked to see where they were and discovered they were in attendance at AA. And so he went to a meeting, and by gosh, he recognized that this was a group that, if it could be organized correctly, might do some good. And so he began to support it in the way that society thinks of supporting things, and he started sending everybody who came through his court to AA, to the local meeting there. Well, it absolutely swamped that meeting. It just inundated it. Now, AA, among other things, tends to succeed, we feel, because there's a relatively large reservoir of success here in this room. People have been sober for a period of time and have a grasp of what it's all about. And you drop a newcomer in, like a little water into this reservoir, and he tends to take on the general coloring of the rest of the group. But if you take a group where there's only about 6 or 7 regulars, and you send 70 or 80 guys there from the courts, all smashed, all resentful, yeah, you tell them horse shit, you've been on the road, and it somehow seems to depress the tenor of the meeting. And it absolutely killed those meetings there in the harbor area. And AA made up its mind it was going to have absolutely nothing further to do with the courts. And then, maybe 15 or so years ago, I don't know, time flies, but another municipal court judge, his name was Clifton, who used to do business in Lincoln Heights in Los Angeles, he came along, and he too began to notice that some of his regulars weren't there. And he missed them, checked, and found that, of course, they were in Alcoholics Anonymous. Where else are they going to be other than the institutions or the graveyard? And so he too decided that something should be done to make use of this program, but he had learned about what had happened to the predecessor, and so he went around and spoke to each of the meetings that were then in existence. And maybe this is 25 years ago, I don't know, time flies. But he spoke to all of the meetings. He attended the meetings, and he knew that at least in the Los Angeles area, we don't permit anyone who is not an alcoholic to speak from our podium during the meeting. So he would ask the secretary if it would be possible for him, after the meeting ended, to speak to anyone who cared to stay a few minutes longer because he wanted to talk to them about something. Well, almost everyone stayed. It's always nice to get a practicing judge on your terrain. And he got up and made an extraordinarily eloquent sort of a presentation. He said, I want to suggest to you that no one comes to your organization entirely voluntarily. And he said, no one who has not been to your organization can imagine what it's like. Well, we had to all agree, of course, that that was true, because if you've ever seen what they do by way of portraying AA in theatricals or on motion picture screens or otherwise, remember Come Back Little Sheba, Burt Lancaster taking his one-year cake. I mean, oh God, depressing, here's your cake, oh thank you, good Lord, I mean, the gloomy place they met in the days of wine and roses would have gotten you drunk. It was just, they've never been able, and I've asked people, friends of mine in the industry, why don't you show AA in some of your theatricals in a way that it really is? And they've all told me, well, we can't because no one will buy it. It isn't realism. How can you show a group of people laughing uproariously at something that would tear tears from the heart of a stone? He said, they're not going to buy that. Somebody gets up and says, yeah, and then I got drunk and threw my mother-in-law down the steps. And being drunk, I fell after. I got a hernia. Then they put me in 4-point restraint, and I vomited straight up. How can you possibly show a meeting in which someone, perhaps the very leader, gets up and says, I've been crazy all day today and wanting to kill myself. But everyone says, oh, go, Jim, you're reading my mail. There are a few other places in which you can begin an address with that line and get a standing ovation. And so he said, we have to show it in the way the public thinks it ought to be, and then they will think it is realistic. And we thought, well, that's probably true enough, because none of us certainly could visualize what AA is like. When you've heard about it, it doesn't matter how intellectually familiar you may be with its precepts. Unless you have been to a meeting, you still think it is some kind of a dreary place where you're going to be encouraged to walk unendingly through a dank tunnel, no light, no joy, or struggle up some arid mount carrying your cross of sobriety, no more relief through Saturday night frolic, or you can't visualize it for being what it is. And no one, as the judge pointed out, comes to AA entirely voluntarily. We are all here at the coercion of a non-understanding wife, or worse, an understanding one, or a wife who's threatening to leave us or to come back, whichever is the more drear prospect. No one gets up in the morning and says, life is good, life is rich, I think I'll join Alcoholics Anonymous. Perhaps Jesus wants me for a sunbeam. It's time, So he said, I suggest to you that you have all been lashed or goaded by someone, a doctor, your employer, your wife, a probation officer, someone. You're trying to impress someone with something before you come. And he said, after you get here, you will never be the same again. I've seen it. He said, and what I would like to do is I'll pick selected ones, not the hardcore who've been drunk 1,000 times, or not the one who's did the first social drink, but those who seem to be about ripe, and I will offer them the opportunity of attending a few AA meetings instead of going to jail. And he said, I would like, if you will permit it, to give them a little card to have signed to show they've attended. Now he said, they'll probably go out and get drunk again afterwards, but they will never forget what AA has been like after they've been there. And we all thought, well, that's kind of sound. And he said, now, as far as this card goes, remember, you're only going to have to sign it, if you will, Jim, Bob, Ed, Betty, Joan. He said, no one will ever ask. He said, we realize if we were ever to ask you, is that your somebody's signature, you would never again sign a court paper for us. And so this newcomer is going to know, the man we send, he's going to know, unless his brain is totally wet from booze, that he can sign these things himself. Nobody's ever going to check up. If he wants to sign them, sign them. And, and who knows? He said, but I suspect that there is something in the practicing drunk that would like to get well. And he'll probably come in and have somebody sign the darn things, even though he could forge them himself, sign them himself. Well, this caused great consternation. Those of you who are around at this time will remember it, because in each group, the innovation is something that is dreaded in AA. When we get into a rut, we don't try to break free, we set out to furnish it. I'm proud to say I have resisted every change in the last 30 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't understand that when I first came around. I couldn't see why AA wasn't ready to go with new concepts and ideas. The thing is, when your life has been saved by an organization which, as you remain in it, you increasingly do not comprehend. You're not quite certain what is doing it. We try. Obviously, when you're new, you will quickly understand AA. You will wrap it up into an intellectual pill that you can give to a newcomer that he may swallow it and pass a miracle, and he will just refuse to do it, just to spite you. And then you'll catch somebody staying sober the wrong way. Oh, boy, that's disconcerting, I'll tell you. Because if you're only half fanatic, and he's staying sober a different way than you are, that's a kind of a challenge to your program. I'd rather see him in a drunkard's grave than staying sober like that, I'll tell you. So you don't know what is doing it. And so in time, you don't want to change anything. And I can remember when I first came around, a clubhouse out in Burbank had an absolute schism, split right in half, because someone suggested putting in air conditioning. And the old-timer said, "We didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous for comfort, it came sobriety." Old-timers in Burbank enunciate like that. And I was so new, I had no idea that sweat and sobriety were necessarily synonymous states. But now I'm not so sure. So AA doesn't go in quickly for change. And when this judge said he was going to have people come around with papers, the groups just absolutely warred. It was civil strife. Brother took arm against brother. A number of people got drunk to protect AA's good name. And finally they decided, it got so desperate, they decided they would submit the question to central office and let the resolution be made there. And so they did, and they got back one of those ringing enunciations of principle that pretty well solved the problem. The central office said, each group will do as it wants. That being taken care of, I think most of the groups then began to actually sign the cards. Some still don't, but most, I think, do. I was a secretary back in those eras, and the way I worked it out was when I'd see a guy come in with one of those cards, I would become aware of him because he would generally come sidling up to me before the meeting. And he'd say, "I understand you're somebody." I'd say, that's true. That's why you don't see the wall when I'm standing in front of it. And he would say, no, I mean, you're somebody who can take care of something like this. And whoop, he'd give you a little flash of the card, like a French postcard. And I'd say, "Oh, been sent here by the courts, huh? Got a little problem with your drinking." He said, oh, hell no, I don't have any problem with drinking. Well, a couple of beers, okay, some people like this goddamn guy put a hand up against a wall, some bitch. That guy, And I said, well, now, just a minute, let's be clear on this. You were in jail. And apparently you were convicted of some sort of offense. And yet you tell me that you don't have a drinking problem? Oh, hell no, you had a couple of beer, met this broad, we got in that goddamn car in a hotel room. Jesus Christ, come shove me up against the wall, if I hit me right that broad, spread your legs on some bitch. And so I said, all right, okay. All right, now we understand each other then. You've been in jail and you have no drinking problem. That means you're a criminal. Now, God damn it, I've told the courts to keep your element out of here. We want the criminal element out of AA. Now, give me that damn card. I'm going to sign it all ahead. You get your ass out of here. You stay out of here. And I start signing. John, Ed, Bill. I'd get about 3 signed. The guy'd yank it back. I can come if I want to. And I have begun to suspect that's about the way AA would have it. You can come if you want to. If you don't, it certainly is not going to cause anyone here to miss his breakfast tomorrow morning. My life depends upon AA, but I guarantee you AA does not depend upon me. The trouble with being around and opposing all change is that you will eventually get caught up into it. When I first came around, there were a few things about AA's general practice that I liked. I remember deplored closing the meetings with the Lord's Prayer. I was a devout atheist in those days, and I believed in no God with a capital N, and the very idea of quoting from a particular religious text just offended me terribly. I not only wouldn't say the Lord's Prayer, I wouldn't lower my eyes while you said it. See, I looked around the room to see who else was standing there proudly erect with his jaw clenched. Someone who had enough human dignity and respect to realize that man rose out of the primordial ooze, to become a thinking, rational creature who did not bow his head and ask to be beaten by some juju. And I looked, in other words, for the intellectual that would be worthy of discourse with me. And after the meeting, I would go up and speak unto them. I would often say, "How'd you like to go out and have a drink?" And they would usually say, "Yes." And then after a time, I decided I better come to grips with this, and so I thought, why don't you sit down and translate that particular passage into something that is acceptable to you, so that you will have something to say when they say it. Well, considering who the author was supposed to be, that might be somewhat presumptuous, but I sat down and I translated it. The only thing was it didn't scan. It began, "Whereas." Comes now the petitioner. I remember it ended, "Further affiant saith not." It was also very long. I had to go like hell, and I still couldn't get done before the others. And then it dawned on me one day, like a revelation. Things come slowly, by the way, if you're handicapped with too many degrees. A person who hasn't been formally educated has to use his brains. But it dawned on me, why don't you say it the way everyone else says it and understand it the way you translated it? And isn't that incredible? It just like a light broke through. I thought, maybe that's what they mean by God as you understand him. Isn't that an astonishing thing? I remember I was also impressed in the course of the translation by the fact that it says in there that we ask to be forgiven. How much? How much forgiveness do we seek? We ask to be forgiven only to the extent that we are willing to forgive others. That came as a bit of a shock to me, because I'm pretty good at carrying a grudge. Forgive me to the extent, I'm willing to forgive others. So it was kind of a breakthrough. And I had only gotten that really mastered well, and gotten to where I could now say it blithely without worrying about it, when about 15 years ago, I guess, another thing happened. People began to hold hands while they did this. Actually reach out and touch each other's flesh. Now, I am a loner. People do not lay their hands upon me in a hail fellow well-met fashion. See, I have been called sir since I was 14. My intimates call me your honor. And And suddenly, here are total strangers pawing at me in a meeting. And the problem with it in particular was I never stood between two ladies. Invariably, when they said the Lord's Prayer, I would find myself enclosed by two longshoremen. And we would have to hold hands, hoping that we all understood. And by the way, I'm still not altogether sure about this practice, but you see, the problem is it still poses a problem to this extent even today, in that there are ways of holding hands. See, real men, I'm talking about John Wayne and I, real men, when they're going to hold hands, put their knuckles forward. If you're going to help a young lady or your child across the street, you put out your hand, knuckle forward. And the lady and the child puts their hand out, palm forward. That's how one holds hands. From the time the memory of man runneth not to the contrary, that's how men have held hands. So they say, we will now say the Lord's Prayer. And the two longshoremen and I get up and fence. I'll lead, put your hand up. And I see the ladies doing the same thing. I'm not your damn mother, put your hand up. But now I've been around AA so long that when they announce we're going to say the Lord's Prayer, if I see anyone standing off to the end of a line, I immediately tug the whole line towards him so I can grab his hand, lest some of it run out and spill on the floor. You know, I get caught up in it. God, this must be inspirational to the newcomer, isn't it? If you've noticed, I have said little about the demon rum, and certainly nothing at all about my own intimate drinking career. I don't see any particular reason to get personal from the podium. But it's really that I am just bored to death with it, my own drinking story. And also, because the longer I am sober, the less relevance there seems to be in a recitation of the things that happened to me while I was drinking. Because I didn't do them on purpose, and they didn't tell what I was like in the sense of how I felt. There's a tendency today, of course, more and more for the speakers to get up and under the guise of telling what they used to be like, and talk not only about the things that happened to them, but talk about all their particular social hang-ups and neuroses as if they were alcoholism. You know, they get up and describe some outrageous bit of behavior, maybe a classic neurotic trait of mankind, maybe a phobia of some sort, and say it's alcoholism. And it isn't. No, it's just a trait that some people have, and often a regrettable one. I remember one guy got up and said that when he was a practicing drunk, he used to do pool maintenance. And when he needed money badly, he would just go to one of his clients, customers, and tell them that the motor on their pool pump had burned out. And he would take it out, clean it off, repaint it, put it back, and charge him $150. And he said, but that's what we alcoholics are like. And I thought, the hell, that's what we alcoholics are like. That's what thieves are like. No, I was just incensed because not more than a week prior to that, my pool man had come to me. You know, or they'll get up and describe, all of these things are describing either traits that are unique to them, such, one of the classic one, a person will say, oh, when I was drinking, I couldn't even drive on the freeway. That's what alcoholics are like. No, it isn't. That's what they're like. I've seen them drive. They shouldn't be on a freeway now. I mean, a classic thing, they'll talk about, they'll say, yes, I used to think I had a drinking problem, and not anymore. I see now my problem was a living problem. Alcoholism is dealing with living problems. Now, we all understand what they mean, but the implication of that often seems to be that the non-alcoholic has dead problems. I never knew anyone to have a problem that wasn't a living problem. Or they'll say things like, oh, long before I took my first drink, I was an alcoholic. Why, even before I was 10 years old, I was already immature. Run that by one more time, will you? See, the thing is that, as our book tells us, 1 person in 10 who drinks is going to be an alcoholic, and it has not the faintest thing to do with his race, creed, color, sexual status or preference, educational background, financial standing, none of those things. It's a phenomenon, a craving that occurs. And yet, because we can't do anything about that, if you've got it, you got it, you're going to die with it, we naturally talk about the secondary part of it, which isn't directly alcoholism, but it's how you keep your emotional barometer below the spell of storm that's going to drive you out to take the first drink. Because we have the physical allergy combined with what? Not a neuroses, a psychosis, a psychopathic inferior, none of those things. We have what? It described in our, I don't know, it was read tonight because I come in a little late, but in chapter 3 they describe the obsession. Physical allergy combined with an obsession of the mind. And what is the obsession? It's that somehow, someday, you're going to control and enjoy your drinking. That obsession drives you out to take the first drink, which then dooms you. See, but we don't have to talk about why we are alcoholic in the sense of having a physical allergy. Maybe some of you saw that Channel 28, at least in L.A., the public broadcasting thing on alcoholism here some months ago. I always watch things on Channel 28 anyhow, but I mean, this particular one caught my fancy because it's going to deal with alcoholism, latest discoveries and so on. And they, by the way, have made some interesting ones. But the thing in there that, that I was just delighted by, they had taken a group of monkeys, 20 or 30 of them, and they were in a cage, and they had 2 tubes leading down into the cage to dispense liquids. And one of them was pure water, just ordinary drinking water. And the vast majority of these monkeys drank from the water spout only. The other one, however, had alcohol in it, not straight alcohol. Only a Homo sapien would put anything as vile as straight alcohol into his mouth. I mean, no brutish beast would drink whiskey. So they had it mixed with papaya juice or mango juice or something. Anyhow, they had it cut and distilled so that it was palatable even to an animal. And the monkeys would go over and take a little whack of it from time to time, some of them, and they found they didn't like it. It did things to them that were uncomfortable. Or they would take 1 or 2 little licks and then let it go. But 2 of them, if any of you saw it, tell your friends about it. It was the damnedest thing. These 2 guys would come up to this spot, it looked about like this microphone, you know, and they would just fight to get up there. And they, you know, just going away at it. You know, they got absolutely smashed. They were weaving around the cage. One of them, I remember, climbed up on a bough and just kind of folded over it. Blop, and on the other side, you know, looked like one of those wired things. Damnedest thing. Now, those 2 monkeys were alcoholic. And yet no one ever asked them the idiotic questions they ask us. You know, are you an only child? Did you have difficulty with bowel training? How do you feel about your mother? Have you closed the Oedipus triangle, or is it the decline of petty bourgeois capitalism that is causing you discomfort? I mean, nobody ever asked nutty things like that about 2 monkeys. It's obvious they were different, but physically different, and that's, as far as I can tell, is what the alcoholic, at least for me, it is necessary to comprehend that that's what the alcoholic is like. Because I'm a very disciplined person. In fact, most alcoholics that I know are extraordinarily disciplined. If I thought that willpower, discipline, could allow me to continue to drink, hell, I probably would still be fighting it. It was only after I fully grasped the fact that willpower has absolutely nothing to do with it. To make up your mind you're not going to be an alcoholic like your father is like saying, well, one thing I'll never be is a diabetic, by gosh. I noticed they also had half the room divided here between smokers and non-smokers or something. Now, I smoked 2 to 3 packs of Camels for over 35 years, and I smoked them. Some people used to try to smoke them as long as they could. I smoked them as short as I could. And I eventually burnt my lungs up. By the way, it may sound, if I say anything that sounds disparaging to either the liquor or the cigarette industry, I don't mean to. No, I mean, that's true. I divorced old Baron Reason from my bed and took the daughter of the vine to spouse, and because she threw me out in the gutter eventually, I hope I'll never be so lacking in chivalry as to condemn her. But in fact, everybody talks about overpopulation, and yet the tobacco and liquor industries are the only one really doing anything about it. But I eventually, as I say, I burnt my lungs up and had to quit, and I don't make any moral judgments between those of you who still lack the courage to give up a loathsome habit and the point is, when you're ready to quit, it'll be the simplest thing you ever did. Until then, forget about it. Don't even hang around with people who talk about it. It's impossible. When you're ready, it will be simple. You just get on your knees and bark like a dog for a month, and otherwise it's nothing. But it is easy once you want to do it, because, as I say, alcoholics are disciplined people. We really are. Occasionally, the non-alcoholic will say of us, "Oh, you alcoholics lack willpower." You know why they say that? They think we want to stay sober. If they had any idea what our true goal was, they would stand in awe of our dedication and persistence. What does a non-alcoholic have that he will pursue to the gates of insanity or death, huh? Nothing, I'll tell you. But the point that I wanted to make about the smoking was that during all the years that I smoked, no one ever came up and asked me the questions they asked me about my drinking. Now, the reason for that is simple. It's because everybody understands the phenomenon of getting hooked on nicotine. Because 10 people out of 10 people who try cigarettes for any length of time are going to be hooked. And, and no one, has anyone ever come up to anyone here and say, "Why did you start smoking? Was it lack of self-esteem? Did you have a hole in your stomach through which wind blew?" Of course they didn't. They know why we started smoking. You want to look grown up. You want to, by gosh, be one of the gang. And, of course, there's nothing more punkish than a 14-year-old outside of junior high school lighting up. But the thing is, you think this is what adults do when you're in a hurry to become an adult. And if you grew up as I did during the 30s, look at any motion picture made during the 30s or the 40s. Everyone smoked. Everyone. Any man, by God, smoked. Paul Henry, he lit 2 at once, gave 1 to a lady, and got laid. Just like that. So, you asked me why I smoke. And a woman who smoked in those days would do anything. It never dawned on us that those sexy-looking trollops who were smoking cigarettes would eventually become gray-haired old ladies sitting at the bus stops. Put it out, grandmother. But nobody asks you those dumb questions. Or has anyone ever come up to you and said, Jim, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. You're already smoking. Why are you smoking in the morning? Do you take a cigarette when you arise? You do that when first thing you get out of bed? You take a cigarette? And I notice that you seem to even smoke when you're alone. No, I don't ask you to give up smoking. I just suggest you wait until dinner and then take 2 or 3 like I do and then quit. Nobody asks those idiotic questions. They know why we started, and they know that 10 out of 10 people who smoke are hooked, and they're going to smoke about every 15 minutes till the day they either quit or they die. I mean, it's as simple as that because everybody does it. It's only the fact that 1 out of 10 who drink are going to become alcoholic, and the other 9 will never understand it, nor we them. I can't even fathom the non-alcoholic. I mean, they are beyond my comprehension, despite the fact that when I sobered up, I discovered my whole family was filled with them. Low-bottom social drinkers. You know, the kind that when you go to their house, they say, would you like a drink before dinner? And they mean it. They actually are going to take a drink and eat right on top of it. You know, I couldn't believe they were serious. You know, it trapped me several times. I never wanted a drink before anything. Unless somebody said, would you like a shot? Well, I'm mixing your drink. Yeah. No, an alcoholic never wanted to be a social drinker. My idea of purgatory would be an unbroken series of Sunday afternoons where you took 2 beers and stopped. Oh, God, the horror of it. And yet, non-alcoholics like that. In my family, as I say, on a festive occasion, they might take 2. 3 even. And then the lady's eyes glow warmly, their toes beat a little tattoo on the carpet. But if you say, will you have another? They say, oh, no, I'm beginning to feel it. Now, think of the logic that underlies that kind of a response. Here's something so expensive it'll almost bankrupt you, and so vile tasting that you can scarcely put it in your mouth and swallow it, and the moment it begins to do that which God and man designed it to do, they quit. See, if there's help for people like that, it lies outside our organization. We have our foibles and our hang-ups, but we're not devoid of reason. When we drink intoxicants, by God, we can proudly say we become intoxicated. So alcoholism is, as I say, is an extraordinarily simple thing. It's the most easily recognized disorder ever to have afflicted mankind. The very name gives you a rather strong clue as to what the problem is. The solution to it is equally self-evident. We have a book that has a caption subtly titled, How It Works. Now, the intellectual will miss that for a period of time. Nothing profound could possibly be that easy to apprehend. If the caption were the dynamics of permanent aridity or something, you might notice it, but those steps in there are what are called our program, and they're numbered to help the intellectual grasp the sequence. And if one takes them, they invariably work. Now, most people never take them. I mean, 19 out of 20 alcoholics die drunk. Not because they don't know about AA. Of course they know about AA. You can't avoid knowing about AA. Police brutality being what it is, you can't lie down on Pacific Coast Highway at high noon without some cop giving you a list of meetings. Save yourself. Get away, pig. You know, but most people, they don't try the steps, not because they're afraid they won't work. They don't try them because they're afraid they will. And I know that this is why AA is much more important to me, much more necessary to me. My life is much more dependent upon it than it was years ago, because I've been a long way from my last drunk. I can hardly remember the horror of down on the floor, crawling, sick, desperation, wanting to die drunkenness. It's been that long ago. We tend to forget the unpleasant in life and remember the pleasant, not because we're alcoholic, but because we're human. Everyone, if they had to remember intensely every rotten, miserable, painful thing that occurred to them, I don't think we could go forward. We forget them. And I've never had a child. Some of the women I've been acquainted with have, and they tell me it is a horribly painful event. And I know it's true because I've heard them. So I've been out in the waiting room, and I've heard them call out from the laboring room, you know, saying, "If that son of a bitch is out there, tell him our engagement is off. If this is what marriage is like." And yet a few months later, with a mewling, puking infant at their bosom, they're ready to do it again. And that's not because they're alcoholic. It's because you remember pleasure and you forget pain. To this day, I can still remember the piquant flavor of a light beer on a warm Sunday afternoon, whereas I'm totally unable to bring up with any sense of immediacy the much more pungent aroma created the time I got a shrimp caught in my nostrils while vomiting. I remember I thought I was going to die, but other than that, nothing. And so it is important for me to now be with AA much more than I was before, because I don't have that lash of horror anymore. When I first came around AA, I didn't need it I needed it, but not in the same way. Then I needed identification, I guess. Because in AA, we identify through people, instead of talking down to us, condemning us, pointing out and saying things about us, they tell things about themselves. You know, I remember one of my first meetings when I wasn't identifying. A guy got up and said, he didn't because I was crazy or a drunkard or anything. He said, he's talking about himself. He says, "I was a crazy drunkard." I'll give you an idea how crazy I was. I used to keep a bottle of wine under my bed at night. So if I needed a drink, I could just reach under and take a pull without even arising. That's how crazy drunk I was. I thought, that's a strange illustration. I do that. You know, in fact, I remember the time I was working down in Montevideo as a translator, and I was living in a pension that wasn't entirely sanitary. And I had my bottle of vino under the bed, and about sometime during the night, a little cucaracha, a little cockroach, came along, following the fragrant, sweet aroma of the wine, scaled the bottle, and fell in. You know, and about 4 in the morning, I awakened with a burning thirst as a result of something I hadn't eaten, and, you know, I reached under the bed, took a pull, and caught that little insect. God, isn't that disgusting? Even the thought of it. You know, it was so repulsive, I almost threw the rest of the bottle away. It was that bad. And so it is very important for me now to remain close to AA, lest I forget. And that's why I speak and continue to do the things that I have always done in AA. It's probably much more important now because in the last few years since I have become an honorable, you can forget. You see, because people treat those in my line of work with deference, particularly attorneys or lower court judges. When they speak to me, they actually lower their eyes slightly. I test them even. You know, I will make absolutely inane and banal remarks to see how far they will go in their obsequiousness. You know, somebody will say, "Boy, weather's sure changeable," and I'll say, "Oh, yeah, well, as they say down in Tijuana, you know, chilly tonight, hot tamale." And I swear, oh, that's so well put, Your Honor. That is so sagacious and witty, too. And so if I'm not careful, I will begin to believe the things that they are manifesting. I will forget that I was appointed and begin to believe that I was anointed. And so it is always refreshing to speak to a group of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I know in this room right now, It is absolutely filled with people who are convinced in their hearts, each and every one of you, that you are smarter than I am, more sensitive than I am, more perceptive than I am. That humility is easy to maintain in Alcoholics Anonymous. I see I have wasted my time and I still haven't gotten a theme. I guess I could get off with a Scandinavian fellow over here whose anonymity I will protect by just looking at him. And John's a wonderful fellow, been a friend of mine for a long time, and I just hope his wife never steps back or he's going to fall flat on his face. That's all. But Al-Anon is a wonderful thing. He asked me to close by telling something I must have told at some time when he heard another one of my interminable monologues. And it had to do with my wife and I had gone over to England, it's been a couple of years or more ago now, to study the English judicial system. And in this court that we attended, one of the courts we attended, Snaresbrook, which is a crown court just outside of London, they assigned two of us each to a courtroom. And my wife went back to law school and passed the bar a few years ago in order to be able to criticize my decisions. And so she and I were assigned to this particular court, and it happened to be because I was the highest ranking of the judicial officers in our group that I was assigned to the courtroom where a high court, an English high court judge was sitting. Now in England, the high court judges are lords. They are knighted. I tried to mention that to the governor, but I think Jerry Brown considered it. Duke doesn't seem inclined. But we were assigned to this high court judge, and so just before court was to begin, he said to us, "Would you like to take the bench with me?" Well, we're delighted. I mean, I'm honored, but certainly it would be a great pleasure and honor. And he said, "Well, fine." He said, "You will have to excuse me then while I don my raiments." And he said, "You may find them a trifle ostentatious." That Peter Wimsey understatement. And he began to put on his robe. Now, the high court judges, they don't wear the humble black that we do. They have crimson, red, scarlet, crimson robes, velvet, I think. And they have ermine that runs from the cuff to the elbow, ermine around the collar running down the front. They wear the long, full white wig, not the little freshman dink that the barristers wear, but the long, flowing, full white wig. And they have buckles and sashes, and most incredible thing I've ever seen. We walked out onto that on the court. We looked like a moving Christmas tree. I mean, he was red and white, and I was just green with envy falling. But when the court began, it was unbelievable to me, because it probably doesn't mean anything to those who didn't, at least in their youth, love the white angel of the law and try to aspire to it. But to be in an English courtroom, the old Bailey situation, the sword in the back, the old tomes on the wall, the black-robed barristers, "Yes, my lord, I put it to you, my lord." It was just an incredibly moving thing to be sitting up there in that courtroom. And when the trial began, it turned out it was a criminal proceeding, and just to my left in the dock was the defendant. And he was charged with aggravated assault. Now, 30 years ago to the month, I never checked to see if it was the day or not, but 30 years ago to the very month, I had been standing in an American courtroom in handcuffs, charged with aggravated assault. Now, how can a person go from the criminal dock from the horror, the black pits, the lockups, to sitting on the bench in an English courtroom with a lord. I mean, how can that happen? There is no means of transmission. Being contrary to human experience, it meets the definition of a miracle. And yet it is no more a miracle in its own way than is going to happen to everyone who will stay around long enough to find what theirs is. In other words, the progression from where you were to where you have been will be just as incredible and miraculous, not the same road, but an equivalent one. But I still don't know the mechanics, as I mentioned earlier, about how you go from the dock to the bench. But I know exactly the mechanics of return. I take the first drink. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.